Good morning. Yesterday, Shabbos Devorim, Shabbos Chazoin, we discussed the element of Tisha Be'av. It was quite a long shiur, so I'll try to make it even more condensed as possible. This Mishnah in Tainus gives 5 things that happen on Tisha Be'av, and it's very interesting because they seem to be related to each other. So, Nixar alav Oseinu shelo yikom sul Orez. This is a story by the Meraglim. As we discussed already, the Meraglim were what we can call the anti-Zionistic Rabbonim of the time, that believed that it was not time yet to go up to Eretz Yisrael. And I refer back to the Parshas Shlach to understand the Taina, even though it went against Moshe Rabbeinu and even against the Rabbeinu Shalom himself. And but that's a kind of a nationalistic and nationalism-driven approach, that they were not allowed to anymore to enter Eretz Yisrael. And then something suddenly, so the both Beis Hamikdash were destroyed. And then we start again, that the story of the uprising of Bar Kokhba. It was the end of the story of the uprising of Bar Kokhba, where indeed they were all killed. And also the city, it's not clear which city, but seemingly maybe Beitar, or maybe it means Yerushalayim, but it was completely erased from the map. It was completely, they used tools to actually completely uproot anything that existed there. They made it flat. And so there are 5 items that reflect in the Tisha Be'av. The first one is a clearly nationalistic punishment. And the last ones are also related to nationalism, the uprising against the Roman occupation. Especially the last one, the uprising against the Roman occupation, has played a tremendous role in Judaism, has impacted Judaism as well. And we saw this already on Pesach, and we will discuss that. So my theory here is that the Mishnah clearly puts nationalistic punishment and ambitions within the element of and includes in it, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. So the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, is it a religious tragedy, or is it a nationalistic tragedy? Is it the end of nationalism as we know it, as we knew it at the time? It's clear that the destruction of Beitar has made a tremendous impact in Judaism. Until today, and for 2,000 years, we actually have added on a new brocha, which is called Hatoiv HaMeitiv. The new brocha, the 4th brocha of the Birkas Hamazon, was added because of the tragedy of Beitar, because the Romans did not let the people to be buried. And they were hoping that the animals and the birds would actually pick on them, and all the bones would be actually be completely dispersed in nature. But when they came back after, I think, a year or so, they actually found all the bodies well preserved, to be able to give them at least a proper Jewish burial. And because of that, we're saying Hatoiv HaMeitiv. Now, this has, of course, and I always said it already many years, the fact that Chazal used that to say Hatoiv HaMeitiv is actually possibly, and we will see that today, is kind of an anti-Zionistic message. In other words, to say what happened with Bar Kokhba is so bad, it means, in other words, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is teaching us, do not do this again. Now is not the time to revolt against the Romans. It happened, you tried, and it failed. The Hashmonaim tried, and it was successful. Bar Kokhba tried, and it was unsuccessful. But it was so badly happened, the tragedy was so big, the violence was so big, that eventually Chazal kind of saying, now we're going to see Hatoiv HaMeitiv. In other words, from now on, we're going to become a religion, we become religious. We will see it, everything that happens must be good. Hatoiv HaMeitiv. If we don't have our own land, then we'll become a religion, and we'll do whatever we have to do with the Torah. The Torah will be what will bind us together as being one nation. And so there is, of course, a political meaning behind the adding of that brocha. But also the political message is in the Beis Hamikdash, that the Beis Hamikdash destroyed the national unity, as we shall see, and the nationalism as a core. There is a big machlokes, a fundamental machlokes within that, whether or not Judaism is a religion or a nationality, is always, and we discussed that already on Pesach as well, was the Rav and Shmuel. For Shmuel, it's clear that the Geula is basically, interestingly, only Shibut Malchus Bilvat. So Shmuel said, Shmuel ain't bein olam hazeh lemois HaMashiach elu Shibut Malchus Bilvat. In other words, independence, complete independence. That is what the Geula is all about. As long as we have independence, we are happy. The Geula, Goy Yisrael, means that the Klal Yisrael will be free from any occupation. Eretz Yisrael will be ours, and we will be completely free to decide ourselves on our destiny. This is what the Geula is all about, according to Shmuel. Rabbi Yochanan, which is, of course, a Talmud from Rab, basically is also saying that it's not that, but Geula means, of course, a lot more. Everything that the Nevi'im said to us, everything that's going to happen will happen with Moshiach will come. There is a further machlokes, which is also between Rav and Shmuel, is that Rav says, Kolu kol hakitzin. Rav in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Zayin Amud Beis, Kolu kol hakitzin, ve'en adovotulo elo b'tshuva ma'asim tovim. In other words, we will not enter back to Eretz Yisrael. Moshiach will not come unless we make tshuva and ma'asim tovim. So we have to be religiously perfect in order for Moshiach to come. We have to deserve it, in other words. And Shmuel says, that it's not necessarily, we might go up even if we don't deserve it. And so Rashi has two explanations in these words. It's enough for an oval to stand up in his avelus, in his mourning. And he says, either Rashi explains it on the Rebbeinu Shalom himself. The Rebbeinu Shalom is with us also an oval. He lost his house, and he's also went into Kolos together with us, and he will decide after a while that it's enough, and he will take us up to Eretz Yisrael again. The other pshat in Rashi is more based on the suffering, that the suffering of Klal Yisrael will be enough. That's come to a certain point that we will deserve the Geula simply because we have suffered and we have paid our due fee for sinning, even though that we are still sinning, but the punishment will be more than the sin itself. So these are a very interesting pshat, but it's very difficult because it does not fit very well in the words of Shmuel. If you ask me, and I will give you my own chidush, is that it's actually, we soll nicht wissen, as they say, but an avelus is something very interesting. I was told by a Dayan here in Antwerp that actually avelus means that it's a maximum of 7 days of avelus, maximum of 30 days, a maximum of 1 year of avelus. Not more. You're not allowed to add more avelus, that it's more of a maximum. In other words, and how does an oval stop his avelus? By getting up. He chooses himself to get up. We see it in halachically in the 7th day, which is Miktas Hayom Kekuloi, meaning that on the 7th day in the morning, the avelus stops be'etzem when the avelim stand up. When they stand up, the avelus stop. In other words, they choose themselves. If they stay longer, it stays longer. When they leave in the morning early, just after the morning, just a few minutes after the morning, it would be, theoretically, would be enough. And maybe even if they would have gotten up 3 days after the avelus, 3 days within the avelus, and they will not do the 7th day, maybe in some kind of historical perspective, it could have been also enough. In other words, it's a maximum of 7 days. Not everybody holds like that, therefore we do exactly 7 days, but the last day we doing a little bit only in a few minutes in the morning, just after Shachas, we get down. But that's the idea. Whenever he decides, in other words, it's up to the humans to decide to actually go up to Eretz Yisrael, basically, to decide to finish. We have to remember that Klal Yisrael could always return to Eretz Yisrael. There was never a stop. Only in the beginning, when they were scattered, that the Romans and the Bavliim, not allowed Klal Yisrael to return. But after a while, there was nobody was standing by the borders and telling them you're not allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael. A lot of Jews went to Eretz Yisrael. Amorim went to Eretz Yisrael. Rav went to Eretz Yisrael to learn and then came back to Bovel. Rabbi Zeir decided to go and live there, to make Aliyah. So there is no issues of entering Eretz Yisrael. It's just a matter of do the people want to go back to Eretz Yisrael or not, and that depends. That's what Shmuel says. It depends on the Klal Yisrael to decide that they are willing, that it's enough to be in Golus, and now we want to go back up. That's how I personally translate the words that Shmuel is saying. I don't know if it fits very well with the continuation of the Gemara, but I'm just wanting to explain that Shmuel uses an expression which is very hard to understand. He could have said it in so many different ways, but in Abolish you really see it. It depends on the overall whenever he feels that he's ready. And that's a very interesting machlokes between Rav and Shmuel, which of course the big halachic difference is in the Hakodesh of Pesach. As we discussed already before Pesach, Rav holds that the Iker of Tzias Mitzrayim is the Torah, Bor Shomer Ab Techusay Baruch Hu Bor Hashem Nosan Torah L'Am Yisrael, and that's what the whole idea is: a religious freedom, religious that we received the Torah, we became a religion. And Shmuel says no, it's the only thing is Avodim Rin L'Faro Mitzrayim, that the code of Shmuel, that Avodim Rin L'Faro Mitzrayim, V'Etzin Misham Biot Chazoko, that we became free people. That's exactly fitting with his own Shmuel is L'Shitosoi, that Ein Bin Olam Hazeh Olam Moshe Mashiach Elo Shibud Malchus, that we are at all a nation, we are a nationality. And the Torah, what the Torah helps us is in staying in the land. The Torah is a way to make sure that Klal Yisrael will remain in the land. How does it work? The Torah, in order for it not to chuck you out, and the idea is when we sin, we are bringing bad luck and bad omen to the land, and the land decides to chuck us out. This is what we discussed. And basically, that's what the Torah does. But the Moshe wants us to live in the land and to be independent, so that he can build his own house down here and live amongst us. And this is how we always explain. So we have here two different points of views. And Tisha Be'av, if you look on the Tisha Be'av in the Mishnah, you see that it is rather a nationalistic tragedy that happened, because it's mentioned between two Zionistic items. The one of them is the Meraglim. They were not allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael, and the other one is the Bar Kokhba incident, which was a purely nationalistic fight. And the destruction of the temple means that also the temple has a nationalistic meaning. I mentioned, but I haven't been able to find it inside, but I've heard it from my son here. But it's not clear if it is an interpretation of somebody else on the Meshech Chochmah, but that the Meshech Chochmah explains why indeed the Har Sinai lost the Kedusha after the Matan Torah, while the Har Amorio kept the Kedusha after the Kedusha Rishonu from Shlomo HaMelech. Why is it Take Kedusha Rishonu Kedusha L'Shato Ul Osit Lovroy, but the Har Sinai is only L'Shato, and it once the finish, once the Shoy, the Yoipel was blown, it's finished. The idea here is that because the Har Sinai is only a religious event, while the Beis Hamikdash has a nationalistic item dimension to it, because probably the idea is that it unites the 12 Shvatim. The 12 Shvatim that were, as in last week's Pasha, not allowed to marry each other, to keep their own identity. But it means, in other words, that they become a multitude. How do you unite the Jewish nation? Through a project, through a house, which is Beis Hamikdash, through a city, which is Yerushalayim, that was not distributed to the Shvatim. That's why Nige Batim is not Tal. If you see a tzoyer, like a Nige Maga on the house, it's Yerushalayim, it's not Tomei, because only when it is in a city that has been distributed to the Shvatim, and Yerushalayim not. So basically, it unites the Jewish people 3 times a year. They have to come together. They have to come to the Sanhedrin of the Lishkas HaGozis. So it's kind of a project that unites the people, as we shall see soon, that it was not very successful. But in any case, that was That's actually the way that we can see that Rav was afraid of, and Chachomim were afraid of new Bar Kokhbas, and therefore they actually defended Judaism as being a religion, and Shmuel saw it only religion as a really temporary and a secondary item, but the real item is the ship to take away the ship of Malchus, and also the whole idea of celebrating Pesach was indeed to become a religion. That's the machloekus between Rav and Shmuel. And there is, of course, another person which I would like to mention today, and this is Rebbi. Rabbi Nossi has the one that the author of our Mishnah has something very interesting to offer us in the understanding of his friendship that he had with Antoninus. It's a very famous friendship that we all know from the Gemorahs, how Rebbi and Antoninus were very good friends, and that Antoninus not only was a friend, an opportunistic friend, but also Antoninus even added parts of an Torah Sheval Peh. So you could say that in theory, everybody that is mentioned in the Gemara would be either Tana or Namoira. Antoninus was also kind of a Tana or Namoira, because Rav says, Rebbi says multiple times, Omar Rebbi, Dover Zel Amdeni Antoninus. I'm not going to go into what he said exactly, but there are certain things that, even fundamental things, like when is a neshama coming into the body of a baby? Is it during the conception directly already the first day, or is it only after a certain time when he gets formation formed and you can see already the body parts? These are all discussions, and that Antoninus added, and he said his own opinion, and Rebbi agreed with him, and he said that this is what I've learned from Antoninus, and it was printed in the name of Antoninus. So basically, we have in the Gemara Antoninus as being, although he was a Roman, probably not the Kaiser, but he was a Roman governor of Palestine at the time of Judea, and Rebbi actually included him in the Ma'amar Chazal. And it's very interesting that he really got into our Torah Sheval Peh. But more interesting also is that they helped each other. So like Antoninus helped Rebbi, also Rebbi helped Antoninus. Antoninus sent him the Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Yud Amud Aleph, tells the stories between Antoninus and Rebbi, how Antoninus asked Rebbi advice on how he can solve his empire, consolidate his empire to his own family. And you see here something very interesting, because this story of this friendship of Antoninus and Rebbi with Antoninus, as in the Shir was asked, and I was very happy that somebody asked that question, but because this sounds like a collaboration with the enemy, with the occupier. As we know what the Romans did to Klal Yisrael, the violence with what they have destroyed the Beis Hamikdash, if a generation later, or maybe two, I don't know how many, generations later, but how can Rebbi have befriended the enemy and the occupier? This would have been seen like in Vichy with Pétain. And we have to hold this discussion. It means, in other words, that, of course, as long as people believed, as in France, la France libre, that they were still believing in the future as an independent France, then indeed Pétain was a collaborator with the occupier. But the moment that you believe that, no, we want to be part of the bigger, for example, German Third Reich, in that case, it's only a cultural element of being French, then you can collaborate with the enemy, then it's not such a problem. And this is exactly what happened here. Rebbi seems to be giving up on the national independence. And he is the one that actually, as we shall see, is the one that actually started off a unified religion around the Torah Sheval Peh. And that's actually, in other words, Rebbi helped Antoninus and Antoninus helped Rebbi, and it is not considered a collaboration with the enemy, because already in Rebbi's mind and probably in his time, it was clear that the revolution against the Romans was not something that is promoted. In the contrary, we have to stop that, as we explained, stop rebelling against the Romans, because now is the time to become a religion and to serve Hashem through the Torah and not just through living in the land. And that's a tremendous shift that happened. We see actually something very interesting, that Antoninus helped Rebbi, And also that thanks to Antoninus, we have the Mishnah. The Rav Shrirer Goin explains, and he makes a correlation between the friendship that happened between Antoninus and Rebbi in the creation and the writing of the Mishnah. It says, "V'shoktu Rabbonon b'yume de Rebbi mikol shmoda," that it was a very calm period, that there were no persecutions, mishum rachmanusa de'ike ben Antoninus v'Rebbi, because of the love that existed between Antoninus and Rebbi. Ve'askim letirutze hilchese yeiched legirse Rabbonon kulu pe'echod shel rishonim pe'echod pe'echod ve'loshan echod. And I will spare you the reading inside, but you can find it in Igeres from Rav Shrirer Goin, on page number 21, on Hebrew books. The idea behind here is that Rebbi used the calm period where normally Romans did not allow the Talmudim, the Rabbonim, to gather together, because this gathering typically used to mean a beginning of a revolt. As we already discussed at the Master of Rabbi Eliezer and etc., Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon, that they were sitting in Bnei Brak. Why did they all go to Bnei Brak? Rabbi Eliezer was the Rebbe, but because Bnei Brak, Rabbi Akiva was the center, was the headquarters of the rebellious from Bar Kokhba. That Rabbi Akiva sent his 24,000 Talmidim to fight together with Bar Kokhba. This is also Rav Shrirer Goin, by the way. That seems to be alluding to that. And so therefore this meeting, Belaylo Hazeh, does not mean Pesach, because otherwise they would have been with their families, but it was actually a meeting where they were discussing the rebellious strategies and tactics, how to destroy and to win the war against the Romans. And so Rabbonim, Tanuim were not allowed to gather anymore. And with Antoninus, because of the friendship and the love that exists between Rabbi and Antoninus, Rebbi was allowed to gather all the Talmudim that existed in the land, but also probably from Bovel and other places, and they're all being gathered. And instead of the Torah Sheba'al Peh being something that was transmitted in a free way, so people knew the exact loshon of the Torah Shebichsav, that was no question about it, but to explain what it means, this everybody used his own way to explaining according to his own understanding, but also according to the person that he is explaining it to. So if somebody would ask on Monday to explain what does it mean, and somebody else would ask it on a Tuesday, the explanation could always be different because people use different languages and try to find examples, and sometimes this example come up in your brain and sometimes something else, and it would be more elaborate or more short depending on whether he has time or not. And so things were transmitted in a very free way, and it was not a danger for losing it, the crispness and the accuracy, because at the end of the day, he explains there is always a Sanhedrin that resides in the Lishkas Hagozis that can kind of make sure that things stay within the norm. But Torah Sheba'al Peh is something that you explain from the heart, and there is creativity, and it's not always in the exact same way that it was explained. And the problem that the Rebbi saw was that this system did not work anymore, since the Sanhedrin did not reside anymore in Lishkas Hagozis. Sanhedrin was only, the job of the Sanhedrin at this time was only for big events like Kiddush HaChodesh or Ibur Shono and these things, but not anymore for to decide exactly what halachas and how to explain the Torah Shebichsav through the Torah Sheba'al Peh. And so the danger was that there were such a big multitude of different ways to explain the same thing. And in order to reduce that, he seems to be saying that he wrote like the Rambam. Not everybody agrees with that, but he wrote like the Rambam. So maybe the Rambam based himself on that he wrote the exact loshon how we should be teaching our children the Torah Sheba'al Peh. So the Mishnah is kind of a standardization with exact wordings that were used, and that we are not changing anything in the way that we explain. So we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah is exact, and therefore it's kind of it's turning in Torah Sheba'al Peh and Torah Shebichsav. so that the pupils, the Talmidim, should learn it in the exact way. And this is the starting point of the Torah Shabbat Peh, because otherwise the Torah Shabbat Peh would never flourish so further, because there's such a multitude of differences that emerge from being free to explain how you want. The exact loshon that the Mishnah taught us, that we have to read it, each word and each letter within the Mishnah and within the word is important and is actually measured, and that is, everybody has to repeat it hundreds of times, the same Mishnah, and learning by heart is in order to make sure that the wordings are exact. And that's something new that the Rebbi introduced to us, and he would only have done it because of its friendship with Antoninus. So Antoninus has a hand in helping actually the formation of the Torah Baal Peh. This understanding of Antoninus and Rebbi in Chazal has been actually symbolized and has been referred to back to Yaakov and Esau. We see it also in Parshas Toldos when the Rashi mentions it, the Shnei Goyim B'Vidner. It doesn't say Shnei Goyim, but just Geim, and Geim with an aleph, could be with an aleph, so two big people, two strong people that will be, and this is Rebbi and Antoninus. So Antoninus represents the Esau and Rebbi represents the Yaakov. And that's very interesting because these two people, the two nations, that suddenly help each other is exactly also in the continuation of the Pasuk, which says that Uleoim mileoim yemot. Leoim means a nation, mileoim from another nation, yemot will strengthen each other. In other words, each one will strengthen the other. So at some point we will see that the Edom will help Israel, and Israel will help Edom. And this is exactly what happened between Antoninus and Rebbi. As I explained before, they each helped each other to consolidate his empire, and also to build up Judaism as a proper religion. And this is what Antoninus was behind as well. And this is also today, even the creation of the Jewish state is also helped by Esau, by Edom, by the West, by Rome, by the Western world, by Christianity, but also the whole Western world. America is helping Israel to maintain its independence. And that's something very, very interesting that that we should take into consideration as well. So we have here kind of how these two nations help each other, how Antoninus and Rebbi, but it also makes sense that therefore that when Rebbi was actually trying to abolish Tisha Be'av, it makes a lot of sense. There is a Gemara, the Gemara that says that Rebbi, it's a Gemara in Megillah. I somehow don't have the paper here. I'm sorry. Rebbi, it says, here it is Ubikesh Lakoir Tisha Be'av. So now it makes a lot of sense, because if Tisha Be'av is a nationalistic Yom Tov, it's kind of to remind ourselves that we have lost our independence. If the Beis Hamikdash, destruction of the Beis Hamikdash has a symbol of national unity, in that case, Rebbi, who actually saw that it comes to the end of this era, and now we have to build around the Torah, we are becoming a religion, it's clear that he wants to abolish the Tisha Be'av, because Tisha Be'av, the only thing that it does is rekindle in us this ambition and to revolt against the Romans. And this is something which he wanted to avoid. He became friends with the Romans, and he saw in the Romans an opportunity to help him building a religion, and not to start again with a revolt and rebellious against the occupier, and then ending up Chas v'Sholom again with a big tragedy, which was actually the Bar Kokhba ending in. And so that's why it seems that Rebbi Bikesh lack of Tisha Be'av is because Tisha Be'av was a nationalistic time and Beloy Hoiduloi. But the Chachamim said, no, it is not necessarily, you don't have to translate it to nationalistic day of mourning, but could be also just the fact that we have lost our biggest treasure, which is the house of God that has been destroyed. And so if we focus only on the Beis Hamikdash, then Tisha B'av maybe could also be maintained, even if you don't want to instill or to start to trigger a revolution. You can still cry over something that we used to have. And that is something that I would like to discuss today. What is this? Something that we used to have. Now, for this, we need to understand the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash. What is the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash? As I explained already a few times, the Beis Hamikdash is actually, if you look at it, is a combination of two different Beis Hamikdash. It's two different houses of God. There is the inner part, which is the Heichel. It starts with the Ulam, and then you have the Heichel, and then you have the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is the bedroom of the Rebbeinu Shloim. And so the Heichel is simply house of God, where Hashem resides, and every house has to have lights in the night. There has to be light, there has to be a table, there has to be bread on the table, and there also has to be kind of a little golden incense place where you can burn incense, basically. And then you have the inside, you have the bedroom, where of course you have the capoeiras, the children that are playing with one with another and are looking at this one with another, where there are children, and it's really the inner place, the inner sanctum of any house in the time in the world. So it's basically a house of Hashem. And outside of the Heichal, you have the Mizbeach HaChitzon, the big Mizbeach, where you burn wood and you burn meat. You never burn any meat inside of the house. The only thing that you burn is the Torahs, and which gives the smell. But in outside, you burn meat, the korbanos, and wood, and so these are all creating smoke. Now that's a very interesting difference between the two, because when you burn the mizbeach, you burn meat on the mizbeach, the smoke of the burning meat goes up and goes all the way up to the Shemayim. So what does it mean? It means, in other words, that the mizbeach hachitzon is kind of creates a chimney that brings the smoke all the way up to the Shemayim, and Hashem, it goes into Hashem's nose, and Hashem smells it, and it gives him a reach nichoyach. He enjoys the smell of burnt meat. And it's kind of, if you want, allegorically, we feed HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We can't eat the meat, but at least the smell he can smell, similar to our neshama that can also smell. And the neshama has a chelek elokam imal, and the Chazal teach us that neshama has a more from the smell. And so therefore we can say that Hashem also has kind of kavayochel and hanor of the smoke and of the smell. So in other words, that makes that we see ourselves as little people here on this world, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is up there in the Shemayim. And that creates a different kind of relationship. So we are here and we look up, and Hashem is far, far away up there in the Shemayim. And that's a relationship that we explained already multiple times. That's a relationship of the Yehudo, of the Yehudoim. The religious people, they see themselves as being very small, busy in the Gashmius, in the dirt of the Gashmius, and Hashem is up there in the Ruchnius, purely in the Ruchnius, and the Korbanos help us to be mekar of ourselves, to bring us closer to the distant God, the God which is distant, which is far away from everything that has to do with the Gashmius and dirt and the sin, and that we are sinners, and therefore the core of the Beis Hamikdash is the Mizbeach, and that's what creates the Beis Hamikdash for a typical Yehudoi, somebody from Yehuda. But somebody from Yosef, he is more seeing the house of Hashem as his resting place, his dwelling place where the Shekhinah is resting. In other words, it's the place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And it means, in other words, how do we see that he is here? Is first of all, we light candles for him and we put bread by his table, but also we also burn something, but we burn incense. And the incense goes up with the Mal Roshan, goes up to the ceiling of the room, and then suddenly spreads around the whole room. And that's something, meaning, in other words, it doesn't go up to Shemayim, but it stays in the room, meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is here, is in the room, resides in the room. And that's kind of a bit of a contradiction. On one hand, we say HaKadosh Baruch Hu is up there in the heavens, and therefore the smoke goes all the way up to Shemayim. But the incense, the Torah, they don't go up to the Shemayim, they stay in the room because Hashem is in his room, is between us. And that's a very interesting. There are two kind of Botei Mikdoshim into one. There's two kind of purposes into one. One of them is HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us, and we are very happy that we have amongst the human beings in this world, in this Gashmis world, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is here with us, and he's kind of leaping. Of course, we know in Elyon Megloishon Shalom Yisrael, but he's kind of residing with us. And on the other hand, we have the second architectural aspect of the Beit Hashem, which is a parallel to the first one, which is the Mizbeach that brings all the way up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is all the way up in the sky. And that's the big difference, and we already explained that between the view of the Yehudo and the view of Yosef. That is why in Mizmor Yosef, I think in Kapitel Ein Ches, also makes fun of the Mishkan Shiloi, and he says that the Mishkan Shiloi, he calls it in the Beis Ephraim, which was in the part of Yosef. It was residing in part of Yosef for nearly 400 years as well, and he calls it Oihel Shikein Bo'odom. He calls it only oil, not a bias, and it's Shikein Bo'odom. Shikein comes from the word from Shekhinah, Bo'odom, between the people. He looks down at it. It's like simply saying that it's where Hashem resides among us. For Yudoi, that's not enough. He's very happy to have a mizbeach so that we can bring korbanos, and it can help us personally as individuals to get closer to Hashem. Because that's the end goal of our lives, is to get closer to Hashem. While the Yosef doesn't look on the self-development, but looks more of what is the job that we have to do, is to bring down HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be able to live amongst us, because he wants to walk around with us. The Tayel, as Rashi explains also a few times, basically it's the purpose is V'shachanti b'stoichom for the Yosef. For Yehuda, it is not V'shachanti b'stoichom, but it is more to receive a kapor, to find, because we are sinners and therefore we feeling distant from Hashem, and we want to be closer to Hashem and want Him to give us, and so we bring korbanos and we're feeding Him through His nose so that He should enjoy it and forgive us. That is basically the symbolic two purposes of the Beit HaMikdash, and there's a third purpose, which is very important, which is a purpose of unifying the nation, as I explained to you before. And that's a very important purpose, because that's the only purpose that remained in the second Beit HaMikdash at the end. Because the idea that the Shekhinah is in the Beit HaMikdash was replaced at the second Beit HaMikdash, was replaced by the Beit HaKnesset. The Kuzari, Rabbi Levi explained that in the time of the first Beit HaMikdash, they did not allow the Jews to build their own Beit HaKnesset. That because the Beit HaKnesset would become a competition of the Beit HaMikdash, and since Hashem was afraid that if you're going to build little temples in the cities, in the whole country, you will end up doing Avodah Zorah on one hand. On the other hand, it's also kind of a competition of the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim or in Gilgal, wherever it was. But it's something very, very important. And when the Anshe Knesset Gdola allowed to build Beis HaKnesset in the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, it kind of took away this speciality, this particularity the Beis HaMikdash had, and it said that the Shekhinah can also reside in the Beis HaKnesset. As Chazal teach us, when 10 people come together, the Shekhinah is even there before them. The Shekhinah comes whenever 10 people gather together in the Beis HaKnesset. And that's one point. And the second point is the korbanos. But the korbanos also, Chazal, the Anshe Knesset Gdola, instituted the tefillah. The tefillah is connected to meat. So the shachas is connected to Tom Shachas, and Mincha is connected to Misha Ben Abai, and connected to Emrim is the Amar. It became a few, but naked is the three tefillahs are connected to korbanos. And the Shalom Purim is the same. So this particularity that we have with the Beis HaMikdash, that we can bring korbanos, has been replaced, a surrogate, if you want, by the tefillah. And not only the tefillah, but also the lining. When there is a musaf on that day, on the Yom Tov, there is a musaf on Rosh Chodesh. What we do is we daven it, we saying it, tefillah, but we're also adding another tefillah basically, but also we are reading it in the Torah. So we make sure that we don't miss anything. And because we're saying it and we daven it, it's as if we feel that we are bringing it as well. And so therefore, the particularity and this uniqueness of the Beis HaMikdash has been diminished very clearly by instituting the permission to build Beis HaKnesses, where Hashem can reside, the Kedusha can come down, and by the tefillahs that we have been instituting, the Anshe Knesset that allowed us to daven, which before we were not allowed to daven, only a Novi was allowed to daven basically, or unless there is a tzorah, there is tzorah of course, and everybody is allowed to daven, but to have a systematic tefillahs to Hashem, only the Anshe Knesset allowed it to us, and because they allowed us, they also wrote exact nusach that the person was allowed to do and to say. Only this Lashon you're allowed to daven to Hashem every day. And that's a very interesting concept. We don't realize that, and we will give another shir on that evolution. That means, in other words, that the Beis HaMikdash lost already two of the three important roles. It was as a competitor to the other. So the only role that existed still was the unity of the nation. This is the third pole, of the third dimension that it brought. And to be honest, if you look on the second Beis HaMikdash, that really did not work very well. Already somebody said, indeed, in the first Beis HaMikdash also not. It is only in the time of Shlomo HaMelech that the unity was guaranteed thanks to the Beis HaMikdash, thanks to Yerushalayim, thanks to the kingdom of Shlomo HaMelech. But after a while, after Shlomo HaMelech, the Klal Yisrael split already in the Malchus Yehuda and Malchus Goel. And the Beis HaMikdash did not help at all. In the contrary, because they even didn't allow to go up to be Oile Regel. So the Beis HaMikdash even became a reason to fight and to have disputes between each other. And in the second Beis HaMikdash as well, the Ezra Sofer came up. A very little number of people came to Yerushalayim. There is seemingly not a big interest to actually come to Eretz Yisrael, come to the Beis HaMikdash. The Chashmonoim rekindled and revived a bit of enthusiasm around it, but even then it was very limited, was quite limited, because from the letters written in the Maccabees, it seemed that they had to try to convince very strongly to the Jews living in Mitzrayim to accept the Yom Tov of Hanukkah. They were not so impressed. In other words, they didn't care so much about the fact that the Beis HaMikdash was out of work during this period, or they were not so enthusiastic on the fact that it suddenly revived. So they had to be convinced with letters, etc. But not only that, even worse, the Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash had competition. There is the Beis Chonyo. The Beis Chonyo was a Beis HaMikdash in Mitzrayim, in Alexandria, and where they brought korbanos, and it was a pure competition of the first Beis HaMikdash, of the second Beis HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, because the moment that the second Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, it seems that the Beis Chonyo also stopped working. There is a Gemara says, Shomati, that they're still bringing some korbanos even b'zman hazeh, meaning after the home. Basically, in other words, it's not a natural thing. The moment that the first Beis HaMikdash, the main Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Beis Chonyo also did not have any more purpose, because Beis Chonyo was kind of a competitor. Is really like a challenger of the first Beis HaMikdash, of the main Beis HaMikdash. And he's also a Beis HaMikdash known in Elephantine. I don't exactly know which period it was, but they were competitors. The Beis HaMikdash itself did not really work as being something that unites the Jewish nation. And so Rebbi saw that, and Rebbi understood that this unification element, this third pillar, the third pillar of the function of Beis HaMikdash actually failed. And because the first two already, by the beginning, was already undermined by the Anshe Knesset allowing people to daven Shachris and Mincha, and actually had to daven Shachris Mincha Neged Minim, and the Beit HaKnesses, the building of the Beit HaKnesses, where there is even Oren HaKodesh. In the second Beit HaMikdash was not even an Oren HaKodesh. In the Beit HaKnesses, we even had the Oren HaKodesh where we put the Sefer Torah. So it's kind of rebuilding kind of a Beit HaMikdash, and with effect, because the Shekhinah is coming down. Chazal teach us that the Shekhinah didn't come down to the Beit HaMikdash, but Chazal say that the Shechina comes down to each and every little place where 10 people are davening, where 2 people are learning Torah, even 1 person learning Torah, the Shechina comes down. So you see here something very, very interesting, that this element of Shechina is also removed already from before they were starting to build, or maybe just after they were building. I don't know when it was instituted, but the element of unification of the nation, it's a big failure. It did not work. And so I believe, and this is my personal opinion, is that Rebbi kind of said, this Beis HaMikdash, that if it's not the third final Beis HaMikdash that will be built by the Moshiach, Melech HaMoshiach, and Malchus Beis David that will be reinstituted, if it's not from that type of Beis HaMikdash, we don't want the Beis HaMikdash anymore that is of that purpose, because it does not unify. In the contrary, sometimes when you build something like that, you automatically provoke a split between people. It's like whenever you have a city that does not have a road, and there is kind of a unity, a natural unity, the moment that you appoint a road, there is a big chance, not always, depending on the road and on the people, but there's a big chance that the people that don't like him so much, that they will actually start to separate and build their own community and ask for another road to exist. And this creates what should have been the unification of the people, of the community, actually creates a split in the community. And similar also, Beis HaMikdash, was supposed to be a unification of the Jewish people, actually created a split. There is the Stoikim and the Prushim, etc. All these things that actually should not have existed. Suddenly existed. There were a lot of different communities in Eretz Yisrael, but also in Mitzrayim, and then also in Bovel, and also in Poras, in Persia. And so these communities, and they were not interested at all. They were not looking up to Eretz Yisrael into the Beis HaMikdash so much. That's a theory that I have, and therefore I believe also that when the Sanhedrin left the Lishkas HaGozis 40 years before the end, it's kind of pulling out the plug. I always explain that the first Beis HaMikdash had the Oren HaKodesh inside. The Oren HaBris was inside in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, which was, if you want, the engine, the battery of the Beis HaMikdash. Masha'en came in the second Beis HaMikdash. What created this Kedusha, that gave it the engine, was the Torah. The Torah, how does the Torah give? Well, the first Beis HaMikdash had the Torah through the Luchos that were resting in the Oren HaKodesh. It was the Torah, the Luchos. And so when this was not there, so what Torah did, it was giving the light and the Kedusha to the Beis HaMikdash. It was the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin that were in the Lishkas HaGozis. So it is the Sanhedrin in the Lishkas HaGozis that actually was the engine that kept the Beis HaMikdash alive. The moment that the Sanhedrin leaves the Lishkas HaGozis, it becomes an empty shell. And therefore, just the walls, we bring korbanos, we make mitzvahs d'oraisas, maybe, but it's only an empty shell. There's nothing anymore inside. And this is a big problem a problem. It's basically, it's kind of as if you want, is as if you have somebody that is terminally ill, and you decide you decide to pull the plug, and then you let the person simply naturally pass away. And so similarly is also the Beis HaMikdash. The fact that the Sanhedrin left the Lishkas HaGozis is kind of already a beginning of the end, knowing that Beis HaMikdash will be destroyed. And therefore, Rebbi knew that, and he actually focused on that point, that it's not anymore going to be the Beis HaMikdash. That's why he did not want to have Tisha Be'av anymore, because from now on we are going to focus on the Torah and on the Torah Shabbat Peh, as we explained before. So this will be what will glue us together. It is we're going to have one Torah, one Mishnah, that will be the basics of all what we call today Orthodox Judaism, of the Pushim, that will actually unite us and make us stronger. And every few hundred years, there is again a split, and then there is something, a book that comes out that actually unites us together. A few hundred years after Rebbi's writing the Mishnah, the Gemara was written and was Nechtam, and then after the Gemara was Nechtam, it creates a unity again, but after a while it again split up, and therefore you have the Shulchan Aruch, the Devis Yosef with the Ramon wrote the Shulchan Aruch, and that's actually united us again. In Orthodoxy, we knew who is the Orthodox role is the one that follows the Shulchan Aruch, or whether it is the Devis Yosef or Ramon. And then you had another, after 300 years, where again there were so many different opinions, that we had another very big author that gave us and unites us, which is Mishnah Berurah, at least in the Ashkenazi community, definitely united us together, that we know that we have a Mishnah Berurah. Nobody can argue, or you can always use a Mishnah Berurah, it will always be an accepted source, although we already discussed that not everybody agrees with that, but that's how also the Chazon Ish go. And so we have every few hundred years, we have books or works that actually unite us back, because the Beis Hamikdash itself did not make a very good job, and therefore we needed the idea of the Torah, the Torah that unites us together, and not anymore the Beis Hamikdash. So for all the three pillars of why the Beis Hamikdash existed, we have surrogates. We developed beautiful replacements, so beautiful that actually it creates us, puts us in a problem of why are we still waiting for Mashiach? And that's a big issue, I believe, is that the success of the Jewish religion on itself is so big that the wanting to change back to how it used to be is questionable. Do we really want Chadesh Yomeinu Kekedem? Do we really want to go back as how it was, where the Nevi'im will tell us what it's going to be, and not anymore so much the Chachomim, where everything will be done in the Beis Hamikdash and not anymore in the Beis HaKnesset? How do we want, what type of Judaism are we going to go to? Why can't we prefer to have the Shechina within us? When we learn Torah, the Shechina comes down, and now the Shechina will go, of course, possibly exclusively in the Beis Hamikdash. Is it really what we want? And that's a big question, that maybe that's the challenge of the understanding of the Tisha Be'av. What are we missing? So some explain, yeah, but we are missing also the Gashmis. Even on the Gashmis, at least this we missed, because thanks to the Beis Hamikdash, the fruits were much better, had a better taste, and there was parnosa, and everybody was happy, and everybody had children, and there was no trouble in the world, etc. Which can be questioned, by the way, because if this period did not last very long in any case. But in any case, you could say that this is the problems that we actually are facing, and maybe and therefore we look up to that type of time. But otherwise, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to really understand the advantages of having a Beis Hamikdash in an era where things have been so well developed, and we have a beautiful religion as it is of today. It's one of the points that I mentioned many times is that I disagree, and I've seen it also in Rav Kook, but I clearly disagree with the concept of Yeridas HaToros. I know that there is a concept of Yeridas HaToros, which I cannot argue, which is, of course, that the Tanoim were much bigger than the Amoraim much bigger than the Goinim much bigger than the Rishonim much bigger than the Achronim, etc. So the earlier you go, the more bigger the people were, the Goinim were. But in general, we can say that the people always improve. So the average, if you look at the morality, the ethics, and the knowledge of the people from the previous generation and the current generation know much more, are more ethical, are more developed as the previous generation. I'm talking about the average of the whole world. Of course, the Gedolim that existed at the time were bigger, so they were sticking out more from the general population. But therefore, we will never have a Chasam Sofer, right? We will never have a Chaim Kanievsky. So it will always be, the Gedolim of today will always be smaller and smaller. But the average of all of the Jewish people is actually increasing. And the proof that I have is, I believe it's an interesting proof, is that when you look on why did the first Beis Hamikdash Chorov, it's clear that the first Beis Hamikdash was Chorov because of the three capital sins, as Chazal, because of Retzicha and Dilaros and Avodah Zarah. So it's three capital sins, but Retzicha is actually the main part. Why? because Avodah Zorah brings to Retzicha and Gilarois brings to Retzicha. Retzicha is what also the Mabul, the Torah, the Torah speaks about the sins. Even Zechariah, when he explains why the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, when he was asked whether we need to fast on Tisha B'av, even though the second Beis Hamikdash existed in his time. So he says that he says, I don't care, kind of, you don't have to fast, or you can fast, or whatever. The most important part I want you is to know the emes v'sholom ha'hevud. What I want from you is the emes and the sholom. And that's the whole idea, is to be ethical, basically, to live truth and not sheker. And that's something which is interesting. So the first generation were murderers. Second generation, the Chazal teach us that the reason why the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed is because of sinas chinam. Sinas chinam is not murder. It's something that you hate in your heart, and of course it's not a nice feeling, but it's not murder. It's already a high degree. And the third Beis Hamikdash was nearly built. If Rabbi Akiva, who believed in Bar Kokhba as being Moshiach, and he believed that he will bring and build the Beis Hamikdash, but the third Beis Hamikdash was not built because the soldiers of Bar Kokhba, which were a lot were from the Talmidim from Rabbi Akiva, were all killed in battle. And the reason why they were killed is not because they had hatred for each other, not because of Sinat Chinam, but Shelo Noahagu Kovoid Zeh Bozeh. So it's already a high madrega. In other words, they did not did not hate each other, but they simply did not show covert. That's already a third madrega. So you see here very clearly, we were murderers, we were hateful people, and then we were people that did not respect each other, which is of a high madrega. So you see clearly the increase in madregas, in ethical madregas of the Jewish nation. And I believe that this is truly true until today. And it's not only the Jewish people, also humanity. We don't see people killing each other on the streets anymore, fighting each other. Even myself, I remember from previous generation, I remember that people were killing each other on the streets, they were fighting, they were drunks, that were what kind of, and this has decreased. In any case, in where we live, it has strongly decreased criminality, strong blue-collar criminality has decreased. And so that's something very interesting, that there is an evolution, and there's a positive evolution in any case. Now, I will end up with something very interesting. I mean, something very important, let's put it that way. There is a question, what is sinas chinam? So we have to work on sinas chinam, ahavas chinam. What is sinas chinam? So people think sinas chinam is hatred between two people, but actually, when you think about it, there is no such a concept of sinas chinam per se. In other words, when a person wakes up, there's no person who wakes up in the morning thinking, I'm hating this guy. Normally, you hate a person is because he has done something to you, he's done something against you, and so therefore you hate him. But there is no such a concept of sinas chinam. So the Netziv, in his Hamek Dovor, in the Psicha to Sefer Bereshis, he says, Mipnei sinas chinam shebelibom, because they hated each other, belibom, what does it mean? Or I don't know what it means, Chosdu es mi she'rou she'noyek she'loi kedatom, ki beyiras Hashem. They were choished everybody that they saw that they did not behave in the same way in the yiras Hashem, in the way that they served God. Shehu tzedoiki v'apikoyim. Everybody that did not agree with their way of thinking was either tzedoiki or apikoyim. And that is what he calls sinas chinam, because there are shivim polim laTorah. There are so many ways that you can see the Torah, that you can understand. If you're going to see on somebody else and you're going to call him an apikoyres, then that is what is called sinas chinam. And that is a problem that we are facing today, because actually it's very interesting when Zechariah was asked whether or not we have to fast during the second Beis Hamikdash on the first Beis Hamikdash, or on Tisha B'av from the first Beis Hamikdash. So the Rebbi Shloim answered, so Koyomar Hashem, Tvo Kol Tzom Rovi, Tzom HaChamishi, Tzom HaShvi, Tzom HaSir, Yeh LeBeis Yehuda, LeSosun, LeSimcho, LeMadim Toivim. So basically, he didn't answer the answer, but he says, anyway, all those days will become Yom Toivim, for Emes VaSholam HaHevel, that you should love the Emes and Sholem. Basically, what Hashem is saying, kind of that's how I understand it, is what should you cry for on Tisha B'av? Should you cry for the loss of the house of Hashem, or should you cry for the reason, the cause of the loss of that? So when a person made a bad business deal and he lost a lot of money, Rahman Islam, so why should he cry? Should he cry for the loss of his money, or should he cry for not having done his job properly, for the mistakes that he has done? And the idea is what Novi is saying, you should not cry for the loss so much as for the cause of that loss. And that is that you should, you should respect each other, you should be looking for being ethical and morally correct, etc. And this is exactly what happened between Beshama and Bethilel. Although Beshama and Bethilel were disagreeing on a lot of points, fundamental points even, and we already gave everyone to share about that. They were intermarrying with each other. So basically, the Gemara uses that posuk from Zechariah, which is the posuk which shows the Sinaskinam as the Steve explains that you have to respect each other. And this is what the Beshama and Bethilel knew how to do. So in other words, they tried to correct what was not done in the previous generation. And unfortunately, and that's where the whole point is, unfortunately, in the few generations later, in the generations of Rabbi Akiva, in his Talmidim, they were not Noy Kuvit there. And that's a problem. And therefore, the whole third Beis Hamikdash was apparently not being built, because they did not, they probably did not intermarry if they do not believe that this is the right people in the Regimentation, our kind of the people, Anshe Shlomeinu, etc., all these expressions that we have, and which creates kind of a split between us. And that's something which I believe is really the message that a person should actually remind themselves when it comes to Tisha B'av, is this sentence that the Netziv writes in Psicha to Sefer Bereshis, Choshdu, that everybody says, Choshdu es mi shero shenoyek sheloi kedatom b'yiras Hashem. Everybody that did not believe in their ways of what is Yiras Hashem, shehu tzedoiki v'apikoros, that he believes is an apikoros. And unfortunately, I don't want to say Lashon Hara on our own people, but this is something that we have. We have people that send their children to the army, that believe that the ones that don't send children to the army are apikoros, and the other way around as well, that they are apikoros. And basically there is kind of a fight between each other, and this has to stop. We have to learn how to live together, to respect each other. We disagree, we even think that it's the stupidity of the other, whatever it is, but we are one, they are our brothers, and we have to respect and dance with them and love them, and just disagree on ideas, because that's the most beautiful part of the whole Torah, the whole Gemara is only machlekes between people on ideas and on ideologies, and it does not make them to be both. Is one of the most beautiful saying of Chazal, because it unites us all around the same concept, that we all want to love Hashem. We all try to do the best that we can in being dobuk Hashem, Yiras Hashem, and Ahavas Hashem. And maybe we take a zoicher that this year we should not have to fast, because Mashiach will have come. And like the Novi says, that all the Toim, especially the Toim HaChamishi, which is upcoming now, should become le Sotoin, le Simcho, le Moyadim Toivim, Bimhero, Yomeinu, Omein.